What's something you've only seen once in your life but will never forget? Oh, I was super lucky to witness this. When I was in fourth grade or so, my family went on a trip to Yellowstone. On one of our long day drives, we were on one side of a valley and saw a few cars pulled off the road. There was a guy with a telescope set up, so we pulled over. It was just around sunset, perhaps just after, and he waved for us to come over and take a look. I saw two wolves running on the edge of the tree line on the other side of the valley. One was dark brown or black, and the other was white. As I was watching, he explained that these were the first wild wolves to return to this area in about 50 years. I remember how they were just running together side by side, like two dogs you'd see at a dog park. On that same trip, we got to watch a mother grizzly and her two cubs hunting deer across a massive field. The herd would run off, and the mother grizzly would circle back to see if they had left any calves hidden in the grass. It seemed like she had no luck. So she came up to the road where there were about 100 cars, all taking photos and videos. This was around 2003, so imagine a bunch of big, bulky cameras on tripods. Grizzlies move fast as hell, so everyone was suddenly stuffing their equipment and bodies back into their cars as the bear got closer. She was used to it, though, and just walked right across the road, up a hill, and started digging through a big log for grubs. Sorry, not caribou. Mule deer might have been what we saw. It wasn't a herd of bison, I can remember that. This was over 20 years ago. Story number 2. Sometime in the fall, years ago, I was walking on a remote country road. There were cornfields on one side and a river on the other, and I saw monarch butterflies everywhere. At the time, I didn't know what was going on, but I enjoyed them during my 2-mile hike. I went back the next day and didn't see a single one. I later learned I had witnessed a monarch migration. This happened to me in southern New Mexico, in the mountains around Ruidoso. I was probably 6 or 7 out on a horse with my dad, and there were monarchs everywhere. They were covering every surface. It was absolutely amazing, and I'll never forget it. Story number 3. My father's body. I was 15. This was during COVID, so I was in online school. It was just after 8 a.m., and I was sleepily sitting on my bed with my laptop open to the Zoom meet. I heard screams and sobs from my parents' room, so I ran in to find my mother and brother standing beside the bed, screaming and crying, and my father lifeless in bed. I'll never forget aimlessly trying to revive him while my mother screamed his name. I miss you, Dad. Story number 4. I was once the first on the scene when a pedestrian was hit by a car. I was just a pizza delivery guy, but got there before anyone else. Her arms were obviously broken, and her face was badly road rashed. She wasn't breathing, but as I was about to move her to start CPR, she thankfully started breathing. Luckily, the cops got there within a minute, and I went to console the guy who hit her. She bolted out in front of him when he had a green light. He was a frequent customer that I delivered to and had given rides home from parties when he was drunk. I never saw him after that. I hope he's okay. I never heard what happened to the woman either. Story number 5. Fireflies. All of them. Around 1979 or so, outside of Nashville, Tennessee, I was driving with the top down around sunset, just cruising through the countryside. I drove along a sweeping right-hand curve with pastures on the right, probably 100 yards or more to the tree line. There were millions of fireflies, it seemed. I remember thinking at the time, there's got to be a firefly for every cubic foot up to about 5 or 6 feet high. Just millions of them rising from the pasture, blinking and glowing, just doing firefly things. I actually pulled over and watched for a little while. I've never seen that kind of number before or since. That was 45 years ago, and I remember it like it was yesterday. Story number 6. A pod of dolphins guided me toward our tour boat in Hawaii. I had gotten separated from my partner and swallowed too much seawater. I couldn't see the boat, but then these dolphins appeared. We weren't supposed to touch them, so I went in the opposite direction from where they came from. About 5 minutes later, the boat showed up in front of me, and they pulled me onto the deck. The tour guide said the dolphins sometimes do that if they can tell someone is in trouble. They were the only others to see the pod behind me. Sadly, by the time someone thought to take a picture, the dolphins had already gone. Story number 7. I was on an oceanographic expedition during my night shift. A friend and I were the only ones on the deck when we saw something shiny in the water. It was a bunch of glowing dolphins. They were playing among some bioluminescent organisms, got covered in them, and turned bioluminescent themselves. All this while they were swimming and jumping in the dark water. It was the most incredible thing I've ever seen in my life. Story number 8. To answer this, I must explain the time setting. I was having dinner with my family in downtown Manhattan before starting college. Before dinner, I went to the observation deck at the World Trade Center. It was a beautiful afternoon around dusk. I thought to myself how lucky I was to be going to college in my home city, but I didn't have a camera. Cell phones didn't have them yet, kids. So I just took it all in, how cool it was to see Manhattan from the tallest building in the city. This was Friday, September 7th, 2001. Story number 9. My mom walking back to our house with her hands covered in blood. A girl I went to school with was driving too fast down our street and didn't slow at an intersection. She hit a much smaller car carrying a family. The only person not buckled was the driver of the smaller car, a mom who was driving her family. She was thrown through the moonroof and struck the curb. Mom heard the crash and went running. She was a critical care nurse and always first to help without thinking. She held the woman's skull together in her hands until the ambulance came, but it was too late. My classmate had a car full of friends, and none of them were injured. The dad and kids in the small car were injured but survived. The girl I went to school with didn't even get a ticket. Small town, wealthy family. I will never shake that image. Story number 10. Back in the late 1980s, I went to a tiny village at the top of some Andean mountain in the hopes of seeing condors the next dawn. The people there were all native Quechua speakers, but they also spoke Spanish. They were all farmers. I and the other half-dozen tourists there had a communal-style dinner and were about to retire when the town turned off the generator that was the sole source of power. It was a perfectly clear night. I wasn't fortunate enough to see condors the next day, but I will never forget the sight of the sky that night. I doubt I will ever see so many stars again, and I wonder if more than a handful of people today ever will. And story number 11. This is a little lighter than most of the posts here. I was driving with my family in the car in the middle of the night, like 2 or 3 a.m., in absolute fucking nowhere, rural Ohio, no town for miles. Way up ahead, I saw a Pepsi machine on the side of the road. I could see it for miles because there was nothing else nearby lit up. It was beside some small industrial building that was clearly closed for the night. I thought, how bizarre to see a vending machine here. And as we drove by, my wife and I saw 2 people walking up to the machine to buy a soda, like it was the most normal thing in the world to be buying a soda from a Pepsi machine in desolate nowhere at 3 a.m. We kept talking about it and quoting spies like us, "Why don't you gentlemen have a Pepsi?" all night. I felt like we were extras in a David Lynch movie. Story number 12. This happened in the 80s. I was in 5th or 6th grade. I was jumping on the trampoline with a couple of neighbors when we saw what I can best describe as a futuristic white shuttle-type aircraft slowly flying low above my house. It was heading north. It was white and completely flat on the bottom. It had horizontal red light panels on the bottom that lit up like landing lights when they direct planes where to land. I don't have the word to describe it. It had a cockpit. I saw the side window and the windshield. It didn't make any noise. It was an oddity, but I didn't think much about it because we had an Air Force base close by, and it was headed in the direction of a small airport in the next city over. I just thought it was a millionaire's crazy dream airplane or an experimental military aircraft. Does anybody know what this was? Does it sound familiar? Well, thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more incredible Reddit tales. Share your thoughts or your own experiences in the comments below. I love hearing from you all. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring those amazing stories.